I never thought I'd be the most confused person in a room full of aliens. But there I was, standing in the briefing chamber of the Concord Blade, surrounded by creatures who had fought wars before my ancestors learned to write, and every single one of them was staring at me like I had just grown a second head. It started with a form. A standard psychological profile form, to be exact. Before every joint mission, the Concord required all soldiers to submit a personal history file. Name, species, homeworld, physical limitations, emotional triggers, and one image of your origin dwelling. The medic, Talis, used the data to calibrate her empathic readings. She needed to understand what normal looked like for each of us, so she could tell the difference between stress and baseline personality. I filled mine out on a Tuesday morning with a cup of instant coffee in my hand, and absolutely zero concern. Name, Kale Morrow. Species, human. Origin dwelling. I scrolled through my phone, picked a photo my mom sent me last Christmas, and attached it without a second thought. It was a picture of her house. Our house, the one I grew up in. Brick walls, green lawn, a wooden porch with a wind chime hanging in the corner. There were flower boxes under the windows, with yellow and purple plants that my mom watered every morning. The tire swing in the backyard was still there, even though I hadn't used it in 15 years. Christmas lights were still half strung along the roofline, because my dad always said he'd finish the job and never quite did. I submitted the file and went back to my coffee. I had no idea what I had just done to those 4 alien warriors. Commander Vethkal was Drath, 7 feet tall, covered in dark gray scales, with amber eyes that never seemed to blink, and a voice that sounded like gravel sliding down a metal chute. He had commanded soldiers for 60 years. He did not smile. He did not joke. He communicated in facts and orders, and he was very, very good at his job. I had been warned before joining Strike Team Obsidian that Vethkal had never once given a compliment to a subordinate in 6 decades of service. Shishin was Aelhari, an insectoid species with 4 arms, compound eyes, and antennae that moved constantly, reading the air around her for information I couldn't begin to understand. She was the team's recon specialist, fast and almost completely silent when she moved. She had been born in a colony hive, one of 300 larvae in the same chamber, and she had never in her life owned a single personal object. Rook was Gorathi. If someone had taken a very large man, replaced all his skin with granite, doubled his size, and given him the quiet calm of someone who had never once been afraid of anything, the result would be Rook. His species did not use shelter, ever. Gorathi slept on open rock plateaus under whatever sky was above them. Rain, ice, radiation, it didn't matter. They considered walls a sign of weakness. Talis was Solvari, a soft-spoken creature, whose skin glowed with pale blue and green light that shifted depending on her emotions. She was an empath, which meant she could feel the edges of what others were feeling. She was the gentlest member of the team, and also, I would learn, the first one brave enough to ask me the question. She found me in the corridor outside the equipment bay, 3 hours after I submitted my file. She stood very still for a moment, which was unusual for a Solvari. They tended to move like water, always slightly in motion. Then she said, "Morrow, the structure in your file, the human dwelling. I need to ask, is that a medical facility?" I looked at her. What? Or perhaps a government building of some kind? A place where many humans gather for a ceremony? "Talis," I said slowly, "that's my mom's house." Her bioluminescence flickered. "One family unit lives there?" "Yeah, my parents. Sometimes my sister when she visits." She made a sound I had never heard from her before. A soft, high note, like a question that didn't have words yet. Then she nodded very carefully and walked away. Within 2 hours, all 4 of them had come to find me. Shishin appeared at my shoulder while I was running equipment checks. Her antennae were moving faster than usual, which I had learned meant she was agitated or deeply interested in something. "The green material surrounding the dwelling," she said without any introduction. "The flat green ground. What is its function?" "That's grass," I said. "It's just a lawn." "It serves no agricultural purpose?" "No. You just kind of maintain it. Mow it on weekends. Water it sometimes." Both of her antennae went completely still for a moment, which I would later learn was the Aelhari equivalent of stunned silence. "You grow a plant," she said carefully. that produces nothing, requires regular maintenance, and exists only to be looked at? Well, kids play on it. Dogs run around on it. It looks nice. She stared at me with 4 of her 6 eyes. It looks nice, she repeated, as if she was storing the phrase somewhere unusual in her memory. Rook was more direct. He stepped in front of me in the mess hall that evening, set his tray down and said, "You slept in an enclosed structure as a child." "Yes." "Every night." "That's generally how sleeping works." He was quiet for a moment. His gray stone-like face was almost impossible to read, but something was moving behind his eyes. "You had a specific chamber," he said. "Only yours. With objects you chose yourself. My bedroom, yeah. Posters on the wall, a desk, a pretty badly beaten-up old video game console." Rook sat down slowly. For a being made of something close to living rock, he moved with a surprising gentleness in that moment. "A room," he said quietly, almost to himself. "That was yours." He didn't say anything else for a long time. He just sat with it, like the idea was something he needed to hold carefully before he understood its weight. Vethkal came last. He waited until the others had spoken to me, and then he summoned me to his command quarters that evening. He was standing at his desk when I entered, holding my comm unit, which someone must have passed to him. He had found the rest of my photos, not just the one I submitted, the whole album. He was looking at a picture of my grandmother. She was at the kitchen table, rolling dough with flour on her hands and on her apron, laughing at something my uncle had said just off camera. The kitchen behind her was warm and yellow lit. There were plants on the windowsill. A fat orange cat was asleep in the chair by the wall. A hand-painted ceramic bowl sat in the center of the table, filled with fruit. "This elder," Vethkal said, without looking up. "She has no guards. She doesn't need guards. She is in the center of the structure, the most exposed position. In Drath architecture, elders are placed in the deepest interior chamber, the most protected room. This woman is next to a window." I looked at the photo. I had never once in my life thought about my grandmother being near a window. "She likes the light," I said. "She grows herbs on that sill. Basil, mostly." Vethkal finally looked up at me. "She is unprotected." "She's home," I said. "That's the protection. The house, the family in it. She isn't hiding because she doesn't need to hide. She's safe." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked back at the photo. Then he said the word quietly, like he was trying it out in a new language. "Home." "Yeah," I said. "Home." He handed me back my comm and said nothing else. But he didn't dismiss me right away either. He stood there for a few extra seconds, looking at the space where the image had been, and I had the strange feeling that in 60 years of warfare, no one had ever shown Commander Vethkal a picture of someone's grandmother laughing in a kitchen. The mission itself was brutal. Urok 5 was a frozen, gray, destroyed world. The Vreth Dominion had stripped it of resources decades ago and left behind nothing but ruins and occupation forces. Our target was a Concord intelligence asset, a Solvari analyst named Fine, who had been trapped behind Vreth lines for 11 weeks. The mission was extraction. Get in, get Fine, get out. We moved through the ruins in the dark. The temperature was so far below zero that the air felt solid. Shujin went ahead, slipping through rubble so quietly she seemed to dissolve into the shadows. Rook carried the heavy equipment without slowing the group's pace at all. Vethkal directed us with hand signals and absolute precision. Talis stayed close to me and monitored our biological readings. I kept up. I want to be clear about that. I kept up. When a section of collapsed building trapped Shujin under a falling beam, it was my hands that found the right leverage point to lift it, and my arms that pulled her clear before the rest of the structure came down. When a Vreth patrol came around a corner at the wrong moment, it was my voice that mimicked the Vreth communication click in the right frequency, just convincingly enough to make them pause and look in the wrong direction, giving us 30 seconds to disappear. When we needed to hold position in a gutted building for nearly 2 hours waiting for extraction, and the cold was working its way through everyone's armor, I reached into my emergency kit. My mother packed every kit I took into the field. She had been doing it since my first deployment. She packed the obvious things: medical patches, ration bars, a spare thermal layer, But she also always put in 3 or 4 packets of instant hot chocolate. I melted ice from the ruins in a heating cup, made 5 portions, and handed them around without any explanation. Rook looked at the small cup in his hand for a long moment. He had never held anything quite like it. A warm thing, made specifically to make you feel better, with no tactical purpose whatsoever. He drank it slowly. "What is this?" Sheehan asked. "Hot chocolate. My mom packs it." A silence moved through the group. "Your mother," Vethkal said, and there was something careful in his voice, "packed supplies for this mission. She packs supplies for everything. Doesn't matter if it's a school trip or a combat deployment. Same philosophy." "She does not know us," Rook said. He was still looking at the cup. "She knows I'd be with people," I said. "She knows people get cold." Rook wrapped both of his massive granite hands around the small cup. He didn't say anything, but he held it for a very long time, long after the warmth was gone, the way you hold something when you're not quite ready to let it go. We got fine out. The extraction was clean. We lost no one. By the time we were back on the Concord blade and warming up in the medical bay, the mission had already been filed as a success. But something had changed. I could feel it in the way the team moved around me. Not differently in a bad way. Differently in the way people move when they have been shown something they didn't expect and are still quietly thinking about it. Talis found me later, when the debriefs were done and the corridors were quiet. She sat beside me in the observation deck, and for a while, we just looked at the stars without saying anything. Then she asked, "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you fight, what is it that you are fighting for? The Concord? Protocol? To survive?" I thought about it the way you think about something you've always known, but never had to say out loud. I thought about the wind chime on the porch, about the tire swing, about my grandmother's kitchen, and the orange cat in the chair, and the Christmas lights my dad never quite finished hanging, and my sister's drawings held on the refrigerator by a magnet shaped like a pineapple. I fight so all of that stays exactly as it is, I said, messy and warm and completely pointless, in the best way. Safe. I want it to stay safe. Talis was quiet for a moment. Her light was very bright. "We have centuries of warfare," she said softly. "We have ships and weapons and strategy, written in blood across generations. But I am not sure that any of us have ever had a reason quite like yours." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. The next morning, I read Vethkal's after-action report. It was thorough and precise, as everything from him was. At the very end, in the section reserved for operational observations, he had written one additional paragraph. He recommended that the Concord's Psychological Research Division conduct a formal study on the human concept of home. He described it as a non-tactical fortification system of significant interest, a structure built not for defense, but for meaning, which appeared to produce measurable effects on human endurance, cohesion, and willingness to accept risk. He had spelled the word home in quotation marks, like it was a technical term he had just learned. I read it 3 times. Then I closed the file and looked out the window at the stars for a while. They had called us young, primitive, unproven. And in many ways, they were right. We were new to all of this. New to the stars, new to the wars, new to the weight of fighting for something larger than one planet. But here is what I know. When Rook held that cup, when Sheen stood still at the word lawn, when Vethkal said the word home, like it was something he was tasting for the first time, something shifted. Not in the war. The war was the same. Not in the politics. Those were the same too. Something shifted in them. Because for the first time, those ancient, experienced, battle-hardened warriors were beginning to understand what it felt like to fight, not against an enemy, but for something worth keeping. And if you ask me, that is the most powerful thing a soldier can have.